Cord Haley had run 31 inserts in 4 years, and he had a system for sizing up the attachments. You looked at the hands first, how they held the rifle, whether the grip was settled or white-knuckled. Then the eyes, and how they moved when something unexpected happened. He had the full read on most people in under a minute. The resupply attachment assigned to his team for the Ashcroft Ridge cache run took him about 15 seconds. She was young, late 20s, maybe, with a quiet face and a resupply vest that had seen real field use, the kind of wear that comes from months of pushes and not from a single deployment shakedown. She had checked her sidearm twice on the bird and hadn't touched it since. She managed the supply containers with the unhurried efficiency of someone who had done this job a very long time without finding it remarkable. He assigned her to the cache position before they stepped off the ramp. She nodded once, the way people nod when they already understood what they're being told. "You're with the load," he said. "Cache position, 40 meters behind the element. When we call, you push the supply forward. If contact happens, you stay with the cache and you do not move from that position until we send someone back for you." "Understood." "Understood, Staff Sergeant." That was the longest conversation they had before the contact came. The ridge at Ashcroft was a broken granite spine running east to west at roughly 8,000 feet, long, exposed, and cold even in summer, with a steep fall on both sides and one viable approach from the southern saddle. Haley's team of 8 moved up the saddle in good order, Specialist Wren on point, Sergeant Foss on the mark position, the others staggered and spaced and quiet in the thin mountain air. The supply attachment worked the cache position 40 meters behind the rear of the element, exactly where she'd been told. He didn't look back. The contact came from the northeast face, which was the side nobody had expected and the side the terrain made difficult to monitor from the saddle. 3 rounds first, precise and deliberate, not a warning, not a probe, and then a sustained burst from a second position above and left, and suddenly the team was receiving fire from an elevated position with better angles than anything Haley had built into his plan. Foss, the designated marksman, went down in the first exchange. A round through the upper chest, not a fatal hit in the immediate sense, but enough to put him behind the nearest boulder and keep him there. His rifle skidded 6 feet left across the open rock and stopped in a position that was fully exposed to the high ground. The team compressed hard into available cover along the ridge face. The high ground position was working down the slope with patience, not burning ammunition, picking angles, waiting for exposure. Haley keyed his radio. Dead. The ridge was killing the signal, which he had flagged as a risk before the insert and accepted anyway because the operational window was narrow and the cache was time-sensitive. He ran the geometry in his head and came up with the same answer every time. The elevated position needed to be suppressed before it could work the team out of cover one boulder at a time. He needed Foss's rifle. Foss was conscious. He wasn't moving that rifle. Haley was calculating his own exposure angle to the open ground when movement registered from the direction of the cache. Not running. Not hesitating. Moving, with a low, controlled purposefulness that didn't look like panic and didn't look like bravery in the theatrical sense. It looked like a decision made before the shooting started, as if she had already worked out what to do in the moment when the situation went past what her orders had planned for. She covered the distance to Foss's position in 8 seconds, moving from cover to cover in a route that used the terrain instead of fighting it. She got one hand on Foss's shoulder, a single check, quick and practiced, the way you check a man when you already know how to read the answer, and then she was on the rifle. She didn't shoulder it immediately. She spent 3 full seconds reading the ridgeline, scanning the high position, the secondary angle, the exposed ground in between, the wind off the eastern face. 3 seconds that looked like stillness but were not stillness at all. Then she settled into the rifle and fired. 1 round. A pause. 1 more. The high ground position went quiet. Haley, 30 meters away behind his boulder, did not move for 1 full second after the second shot. He had expected someone picking up a rifle out of desperation, the kind of action that looks like courage and doesn't change the outcome. What he had watched instead was someone reading a problem and solving it. 2 rounds, properly spaced, placed with a calm that did not belong to the situation as he understood it. The high position was suppressed. She was already reading the secondary. He had assigned her to the cache because she was supply. He had given her a sentence and a grid and moved on. He was already revising his understanding of what he had done. The next 2 hours were the longest of Cord Haley's service. She worked the mark position with a discipline that was not showy and was not reckless. She managed her ammunition with the careful economy of someone who had been in long situations before and understood that the rifle was only as useful as the rounds in it, not burning through the magazine but rationing it, placing shots with intention, keeping a count in her head that she called out once in a low voice when the load reached its limit, 40 meters left. Push 2 magazines. Haley pushed them forward. She caught them without looking back, ran the load check by feel, and continued. She called her sectors in a clear, steady voice. Left primary, covering. Right secondary, move. She spoke the way someone speaks when they are giving information, not asking for help. Haley found himself orienting his team to her calls without thinking about it, the way men orient to a voice that knows what it's doing when everything else is uncertain. He stopped asking himself who she was sometime in the first hour. He had enough to think about. Twice, the fire on the ridge intensified and she did not break from the position. Once, a round clipped the granite face 6 inches from her left cheek, close enough that Haley saw the rock dust, and she shifted her angle, reassessed the geometry, and went back to work. No change in her voice. No change in her rate. Haley, watching from 30 meters, had the unsettling feeling that she was not suppressing fear so much as operating in a register where what he would call fear simply hadn't arrived yet, because the job was in front of her and the job was sufficient. Foss watched her from 2 feet away the entire time, lying on his side with a field dressing pressed against his chest. He had known Haley for 3 years. He had qualified marksman twice. He watched her work and said nothing at all, and his silence was its own kind of statement. The extraction aircraft came in at the 2-hour mark, 2 birds, fast and low across the southern approach, working off a mirror signal Haley had managed to get out in the brief window the ridge gave him. The team consolidated and moved to the landing zone in good order, Haley running the movement with Rowe covering from the mark position. She was the last person off the ridgeline, holding the elevated angle until the final man was clear, and then she walked, not ran, to the aircraft, still carrying Foss's rifle, moving with the same unhurried economy she had brought to every other moment of the afternoon. In the cargo bay, nobody talked much. Foss was stable. 3 other men had minor injuries, cuts and 1 sprained ankle from a hard move across the granite. All 9 were on the birds. Haley sat across from her and looked at her for a long moment without speaking. She was checking Foss's dressing with quiet, methodical hands, adjusting the pressure, checking the seal. She did not look like someone who expected to be thanked. She did not look like someone waiting for the room to recognize what had just happened. She looked like someone doing the next thing that needed doing, which was the same thing she had looked like at every point since she picked up the rifle. He had more questions than he had words for, and none of the words seemed right anyway. He said nothing. The debrief at FOB Carlin was run by Captain Weiss from the operations section, a precise man who conducted after actions the way a surgeon conducts a procedure, working through the sequence of events without editorial, in pursuit of what happened, when, and in what order. He had the contact report in front of him and Haley's verbal account on the board and was working through the timeline when he reached the mark position. Foss went down at 11:40, he said. Who picked up the rifle? The resupply attachment, Haley said. Corporal Rowe. A pause. Weiss looked at the board. He looked at Rowe, who was seated at the far end of the table in the same plain clothes she'd changed into, hands folded on the surface in front of her, expression unreadable. He typed something into his terminal. He waited. He typed something else. The room was quiet the way rooms get quiet when something is not yet understood but is about to be. Corporal Rowe, Weiss said. Your current assignment shows forward resupply, 3rd Battalion, FOB Carlin. Yes, sir. Your previous assignment, he stopped reading. He read it again from the top, more slowly, the way a man rereads something when the first pass doesn't fully land. Then he turned the laptop screen so the officer beside him could see it. That officer read it without speaking and passed it to the next man. Weiss looked at her. Special Operations Advanced Marksmanship Instructor Qualification, he said. Completed at 26. Confirmed long-range engagement record of 2,610 meters. He paused. You requested voluntary transfer to forward resupply following a shoulder wound. 14 months ago. Yes, sir. Your call sign, he said, is it Thornback? He said it the way facts come out when they have been waiting in a sealed file for over a year, patient and undiminished, waiting for the exact moment when someone opened the right folder. Haley was the first to his feet. He didn't wait for Weiss to finish. He didn't wait for a formation to be called or a senior to set the example. He stood the way a man stands when the weight of a thing becomes fully clear to him and sitting under it is no longer an option. He came to attention and rendered a full, clean salute across the table, arm raised, held, without apology. Foss, his arm in a field sling, stood on the other side of the table. He moved like a man whose body was still filing a complaint about the afternoon, but he stood, and he came to attention. The rest followed, one by one, no order, no formation, just men standing when it became the only correct thing to do. Corporal Danny Rowe looked at them. She didn't look away and she didn't smile and she didn't tell them it was nothing. She returned the salute with the same clean precision she'd brought to everything else that day, and then she put her hands back on the table. "I was doing my job," she said. Haley lowered his salute. He thought about what to say, about the 2 rounds that had ended the high position before it could take the team apart, about the sector calls he'd oriented to without realizing he was doing it, about the 40-meter cache position he'd assigned her to and what that assignment said about his read of people. He had a system. It had missed something important. He didn't say any of it. He sat down carefully, the way a man sits when he is carrying something new and hasn't worked out how to hold it yet. Captain Weiss made a note in the after-action remarks block, 1 line, that Haley read over Weiss's shoulder as the captain signed the form. Asterisk mark position held by CPLD, row, forward resupply attachment. Ridge secured. 9 personnel extracted. Qualification record attached, asterisk. 14 months in resupply. 1 afternoon on a ridgeline at 8,000 feet, with 9 men who were still breathing because she had picked up a rifle and done the work. The file had been there the whole time, sealed, patient, waiting for the moment when the situation finally demanded the person inside it. Outside the debrief room, the FOB was going about its afternoon. Equipment moving. Voices somewhere in the motor pool. The ordinary sound of a base at work, unchanged, as if the mountain had not happened. Haley stood in the doorway for a moment and listened to it. He thought about the insert, the ramp, the thin air, the sentence, and the grid position he had given her before moving on. He thought about the rifle skidding across the open rock and the 8 seconds it had taken her to reach it, and 3 seconds of stillness that were not stillness, and 2 rounds, and the high position going quiet. 15 seconds on the ramp. He had looked at the vest and the supply containers and built a picture, and the picture had been wrong in every direction that mattered. Not through malice, not through carelessness, through a system that had looked at the job title and stopped there, as if the title were the whole of the person. He had run 31 inserts. He was going to need a better system. He owed her that much, and he owed it to the 8 men who had come home because she had not waited to be called.